A bit of an inmendham video. Economic subject, just have to do it. I still do watch some of these modern mystic videos, but he's just such a horrible person. I mean, first he deletes all his videos in like 2 days. Talks about kind of complex subjects and basically just discounts any ability for anybody to make an argument because he's just going to delete all the arguments, make it all go away. And doesn't really want to deal with any real person. So he just deals with essentially commenters on some obscure board somewhere in Bangladesh and doesn't bother dealing with real people in this real world that's called YouTube or the internet in general, where people can make arguments. No. So it's just such a horribly cowardly way to play whatever this is we're playing. So anyway, so this is on quantitative easing. I've done these videos before. I've pointed out these really, just inescapable facts. So let's do the chart first. Wow, that really goes a long way. Hopefully you'll be able to see the chart, or most of the chart. Well, there's the basic bit of the chart. So over in the corner there, you can see it says 4,434,863. Well, that's really in millions of dollars. So it's 4 trillion 434 billion 863. So it's $4 trillion. So that's where this goes up to. So this was quantitative easing. 2009 or whatever, they started this idea of QE. This fix the economy by stimulating it, and blah 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 blah. And clearly for all of history before that, at the Federal Reserve there was this little bar way down here, and that's where it stayed, in some sort of rational place. And now it's in this insane location that's $4.4 trillion out of place. And Mystic is arguing that this isn't consequential. I'm arguing that this is consequential in the sense that this is part of the whole idea of having the Federal Reserve, was to monitor banks, to keep them under control, no shenanigans, to prevent 1929 disasters. So FDIC insurance and this was intended to be a hedge against disasters. And those hedges are the very things the banksters, in cahoots with the government, have used to inflate the stock market and protect the economy from the real downturn it deserved to have happen to it decades ago. There should have been a real correction decades ago, and they didn't want to have that because that's no fun for the rich people. So to protect the rich, they broke the very mechanisms that protect the rich from having to jump out of their buildings in New York, their Trump Towers. Because when this crashes, the rich are going to be in the gun sites. Okay? They're going to be the disposable fuckers. Because somebody has to be disposable. And so the idea will be, will we have hyperinflation, or will the federal government default on all of its debt? So those would be your two choices. Germany, after World War I, Germany, where a loaf of bread was $1 million, or we shoot the rich. Which one do you think we're going to choose this time? I'm going to argue that if there's any hope of an election at the right time, yeah, it's going to be a Roosevelt guy. He's going to be a guy who says the people matter, the rich don't matter. And yeah, the rich will be thrown overboard. We'll declare bankruptcy and we won't print the cash. Because printing the cash is death. So all of this that the Mystic says is irrelevant, $4.4 trillion, is cash that would have to be essentially immediately produced in a crisis. This is liabilities that the banks have, in the sense that they've spent their notes, their checks have been cashed, to buy stuff for the government. So instead of the government honestly buying stuff by getting a real bond loan, they've done this sneaky bit where they put the loan in here. So when people tell you there's $17 trillion in debt, this is 4 more trillion. This is real debt. It's not any kind of fake at all. It's as hard and as real as any debt the federal government has, because this is the immediate debt, because this one has to be paid in the bankruptcy court. See, all the banks that hold this money, they have the liabilities for what was bought here. And they have a right in the crisis to say, that's my money. Now, see, in the past I've asked the mystic, well, why is this money in these accounts for now going on 10 years? Why would the banks leave $4.4 trillion of equity, money they could invest in the stock market? Why would they leave it in here? Why, if you saw the stock market just zooming up and you had 20,000 bucks in a stupid CD making 1.2%, and you said, well, it really does look like good times are here to stay, and you could get 10% for your money, well, why would you leave it in here? That's right, there is no reason. The reason why it's staying in here is because the government and the banks both know this money can't be spent, because the only way money gets out of this account, this 4.4 trillion, the only way money gets out of this account is in the form of cash. Government can't write a check. So when the banks need money, the government can't give them a check. You go ahead, cash this government check for cash or something. They can't do that. They have to go to the Treasury and give them actual cash. The government has no checking account. It has no ability to give you a check. It has to give you cash. That's the only way this money leaves these accounts, is in the form of cash. And as I pointed out, there's only $1.9 trillion of cash in the entire globe of American U.S. currency on the earth. On the face of the earth, that's all there is. Just 1.9 trillion. A pretty small amount considering what considering all the checks that have been written on that little bit of money. All the other checks that say you're entitled to a piece of that money. And so this is $4.4 trillion. So obviously we'd have to quadruple or quadruple the amount of actual cash in the economy to pay just this off. Okay, the rest of the debt we don't have to worry about immediately because it's in the form of 2 or 3 or 5 or 10-year bonds. But this debt, this one comes to roost right away because nobody can get paid what they're owed by the banks. The banks can't go into bankruptcy and the accounts can't be resolved. This is the biggest creditor the banks have. This is the creditor has to pay. And the government can't pay it. It would have to print cash to pay it. To keep the bank from going bankruptcy, it would have to print the cash. So it's just so wrong. It's such a stupid lie to say this is anything else but a gigantic dam of inflation. That this is just dumping water behind the rickety dam just to put it off till tomorrow. Put the problem off till tomorrow. We don't want to see any little downturns in the market. Nobody wants to get unrich for a year or two. So just keep pushing it off. Don't pay your bills now. Impose them on the future. And this is just a gigantic, huge liability sitting on top of the future's head, where basically the economy has to be blown up. You can't just fix it now. You have to blow it up because of this shenanigans. And as I pointed out, they did the same thing with FDIC insurance. So your $4.8 trillion here, FDIC insurance was used to probably guarantee $5 trillion in junk bonds. So that's $10 trillion worth of bankster crookery. Federal Reserve, federal government, Senate, the Congress, all these assholes played this game. The presidencies, they've all been in on this sucky shit game, okay, of hide the debt. And that's all they've done because it's bad for the stock market. So they got $10 trillion worth of extra liabilities above the $17 trillion in bonds we owe. They've got another $10 trillion sitting right here in those two accounts, FDIC insurance and in here, and that's immediate. So that's as soon as the crisis happens, another 2009 crisis, As soon as that crisis happens and the banks go squeak, 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 we can't pay, we can't do it, we need our money. As soon as they start crying about how they're going to go bankrupt, this dam breaks and the cash flows. Obviously, the government can't pay the FDIC insurance. There's only $20 billion in the fund, and it's guaranteeing $5 trillion. It's not even close to being able to pay the bills. So, when the push comes to the shove, this is inflationary in an insane way. And like I said, the only way it's not inflationary is the government just declares bankruptcy, tells all the bondholders, fuck you, okay, sucker, you lose. Those are the two choices. There's no other choice. Insane $1 million loaf of bread, or you basically just shoot all the equity holders. All right. So now we'll play this video. Scroll, 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 scroll. Where's the video? There's the video. All right. I could probably use more volume, but it's probably dangerous. But we'll go there. I don't know exactly if that'll be good or bad, but that's what you're going to get.
They've come out and they've gone back in. The overall amount of tokens out there has not increased. They've changed.
Okay.
They've changed the...
So he doesn't make a distinction between the cash money, okay, the government's really the real money, the cash, and all the checks written by every institution in the universe. So any worldwide bank, Bank of Bangkok, Bank of Bangladesh, Bank of whatever, shithole. Yeah, I think that's an official country now, shithole. Bank of shithole. All of those checks are just the same thing as an American dollar bill in the mystic's mind. It's all one economy and you can't make a distinction. And the distinction is no. Checks, like it's the difference between a bond and cash. You know the difference. One's a promise that maybe sometime in the future you'll own this money. You've put your money out. It's gone. It's not, and cash is solid. They're two different things. Not to understand that the government printing a big giant IOU, that says IOU in the future such and such, and printing a dollar bill, they're two different things they're printing. Very different things. And he just will not let that stupid frickin' crooked-hatted hardhead of his recognize that you can't keep playing this game, that they're the same thing. If you had the two machines, one that printed a thing called an IOU with your signature on it that made you liable, and a machine that produced money, counterfeit dollars, you're telling me you can't tell which one you'd rather push the button on? The one that prints the real shit or the one that prints the obligation? That chart I showed you is an obligation the federal government has. It's not, they didn't print money that just goes out and they say, we got away with it, it's free. Didn't cost us a thing. We just printed cash. It was great. It was fun. That's an IOU they printed. An IOU to the real banks. The real banks used their checks. They signed them on the promise that this money is theirs. The money in those accounts is the bank's money. That's the promise. And the promise is you can't use it until we pay it back. That's essentially what it comes down to. You can't use it until we put the money back. That is, we give you real cash that we took out of the economy and give it to you. But we can't use it with printed cash. We have to recycle real cash into those accounts to resolve them. And that's the deal. And it's an insane deal. It can't possibly work. It's just putting off the correction. That's all it is. This is just being procrastinating in terms of dealing with the real pain our debt economy has created, and nobody wants to deal with it, and so they just keep shoving it under the rug. And this is like syphilis and AIDS and botulism. They got all this crap under the rug, and when the rug splits, it's all coming to roost. And this idiot can't understand that. I'm calling him an idiot just because he's just so obnoxious in the sense he just keeps pretending, look, I'm making these totally valid arguments and nobody makes a counter argument. Because you're hiding from them. chicken.
Type of token that's out there, but they have not changed the amount.
So again, he keeps saying the type of token, as if there's no difference between the check from the government called shithole, you know, whatever, and a U.S. dollar. Big difference.
If, should we go with that?
Doesn't matter.
That's the first thing to understand. It's crucial to understand. And it took.
So again, he thinks it is crucial to understand that there's no difference between any of the banks or any of the forms of cash or any of the monetary systems. So, you know, it doesn't matter whether like a country like Venezuela is just pumping the money out of their check, you know, out of the printer presses. That dollar is just as good as an American dollar by any rational standard. No, by any rational standard, everybody knows that dollar's a piece of shit in a year, and our dollars are going to be still valid in a year.
Has taken people years to not understand it. They think it's some sort of mumbo jumbo magic that it must be wrong in some way.
Well, it's just wrong to think an IOU is the same as golden eggs. Okay, to have a goose that laid IOUs, you know, IOUs that say you owe $1,000. Here's my signature. I owe you $1,000. So I have a goose that lays debt slips that make me have to pay in the future, or I have a goose that lays the golden eggs, and it's just real gold, and I'm rich. Those two things are the same thing. He says no rational person could see the difference between one or the other. You know, one goose isn't worth $1 billion and the other goose is worth absolutely nothing.
But it's not. It's the amount of token buying power, because you buy in the outside world, outside the castle, you buy with tokens.
Yeah, again, this has nothing to do with buying power or any of this crap. It has to do with shoveling money into the stock market. It has to do with the fact that if equity prices are going down, the way you make them go up is to buy crap off the market. And bonds are part of the market. So if you buy $5 trillion worth of bonds off the market, it means the people who held those bonds now have $5 trillion in cash. And they're going to invest it in corn, or they're going to invest it in IBM, or they're going to invest it in Google. They're going to invest it and boost the stock market. That's how this debt just is shoveled right into the stock market. When they bought the junk bonds, that's all they did. They took stuff that was going to make the stock market crash and they reclamated it back into real stuff that it was worth real money. So instead of people losing their money and not being able to spend it in the stock market, they basically just restored it as value in the market. I mean, it's just this is just to benefit the stockholders.
The amount of buying power has not gone up at all. That's the important thing. Okay, we'll go.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yes, the amount of buying power for the average citizens, this is completely irrelevant. This just means the rich get richer. That's all this means. This doesn't have anything to do with the poor or the middle class, except that their dollars get weaker because the rich have more claims on them. Okay, the amount of pie that the rich people said is their part of that $1.9 trillion in cash, they can now say a bigger part of that is ours because the stock market went up. They hold the IOUs that with your name on them. And all of those, that $5 trillion in that FDIC account has all of our names on it.
We'll go into the castle. All the riders get their bags and go up to the big counting room.
Okay, so now he goes into this, he has this stupid metaphor where they collect the money and they're just going to give you a transfer, cash for your stupid garbage. But they don't give you cash, they give you a stupid check, a bank check. So his whole analogy is bullshit. The Federal Reserve is the banker's bank, yes. And it was for a purpose, as I showed you with the line. For decades, its purpose was a simple purpose. It allowed Bank A to pay Bank B, you know, in a simple electronic way, just in the back door. So if all the checks that went out from Citibank were cashed somewhere else, all those got cashed by another bank. Those books were done in the Federal Reserve. So the accounts of Citibank could be balanced against whatever Hedge Norton and you know, Bank of Shithole, and all of that could just be balanced out, and everybody could figure out whether they're in debt or in surplus. But that's all the accounts were for. That's why there was no money in them, because it was really the bankers' money. It was the bankers' money in those accounts. It was never the federal government's money in those accounts. Now it's all the federal government's money in those accounts, in the sense it's all the federal government's debt. It's their IOUs. And if they get cashed into cash money. They don't get cashed into some fake little token. They get cashed by the printing press going cha-chung, 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 and printing real fucking money. Alright, so we'll jump ahead to 11. It's where he gets really, really stupid again.
Uses the big bank's money, takes that money and pays it to the big bank, and then the big bank, because it's now profit, gives it back to the government, who has the bank account with.
He has this idea that these bonds that we bought are bonds still paying, and they don't pay anymore once they're bought off the market, in a sense that the government's paying itself, so it's totally irrelevant. And those accounts, that $5 trillion, the banksters did figure out a gimmick where, because they're essentially loaning the government a huge amount of money, even though it doesn't cost them anything because they just wrote checks that they knew were bad, but they know the government's not going to call them on the bad checks because the bad checks were written for the government. So the banks are hugely overdrawn. You know, their books, if they counted the FDI, if they didn't count the money in the Federal Reserve account, they would be bankrupt right now, because they lent a huge amount of money, uncollateralized debt, to the federal government. $5 trillion worth of bad loans. But obviously they have an agreement saying, yes, you know it's a bad loan, I know it's a bad loan, we'll just pretend it's not a bad loan. So he's not even getting how this works at all. The interest is just, the bankers could afford to get away with it by saying, look, we have all this money in your stupid account, why don't you pay us interest on it? And so I would ask the mystic again, if it's the bank's money and they could take it out anytime they wanted to, why are they getting paid interest on it by the government? Why? If they could take it out anytime they wanted to, why is the government paying them interest to keep it there? Oh, that's right, because it goes out in cash.
The big bank. So they say, oh, fuck, come in here, let's sell this out. What's all this running about the palace with bits of paper for? You're the banker, you just keep all the sodding money. It's my money anyway, because I'll cut your head off if you don't use it right. And that's what quantitative easing does.
Yeah, so
this has taken the obligation.
Just complete rubbish. So we'll hear him say it. Taking the obligation. So he's understanding there's some obligation somewhere, but he's not getting whose it is.
For the castle to pay out money to the people, and has kept it in-house, in castle, as it were.
Yeah. So like there's some notion that, okay, we borrowed the money secretly from the banks instead of issuing bonds. So instead of the government issuing a bond and nobody wanting it because they know it's going to go bankrupt, but anyway, and having to pay real interest, they just made a secret deal with the banks and said, look, just loan us the money, you know, look, it doesn't cost you anything, Mr. Bank, to write the check. So just write the stupid checks. We won't count them as real checks, and we won't force you to be bankrupt. All right? So you win, we win, everybody wins, and we don't have to pay interest on the bond. So all they're doing is evading having to pay interest by issuing a real debt slip. So instead they issue this fake debt slip, and they pay a little bit of interest to the banks. That is 0.25%. So they pay a little bit of interest to the banks for a gigantic $5 trillion loan that if they had to issue it in bonds, they'd probably have to pay 3 or 4% interest, 3% interest, let's say, 2.5% or something like that. It'd probably be more if it's $5 trillion, a huge amount of money. So they're evading interest payments, and they're also evading the idea that the federal government is now, let's see, $28 trillion in debt. They're evading that being in the headlines. The federal government is now $28 trillion in official debt. So that's all they're doing. They're evading it. That's why it's in the FDIC insurance, because no one pays any attention. Nobody has the books on that that I know of. How much has been insured by the FDIC insurance fund? They don't tell you. But we know it's all of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. All the junk in the mortgages, all those bad mortgages, that's what that the FDIC insurance insured was complete crap. Stuff people owned, they should have gone bankrupt, and the government saved them. It's not going to save you, but it saved the rich.
And now the government doesn't have to pay out for all those tokens that have been brought in. How are we doing? It's 12 minutes, but I know the obvious question is, but what about these bank credit things that are written on the big bankers' books?
Right. So that's that chart, that $4.4 trillion. So he's saying, what about that? So I'm asking you, yeah, what about the $4 trillion? $4.4 trillion.
So what? Nobody can spend them, not in the outside world.
Okay, so he thinks that that money in that account can't be spent, when of course it can when it's converted into cash, the way it goes in and the way it goes out. It has to go in as cash, it has to leave as cash. That's the Federal Reserve account. There's no checks in the Federal Reserve account. It's just cash that moves between the banks. It's not any kind of check. It's cash. The banks always take cash out of the Federal Reserve. They never take yachts or fig Newtons or some other kind of barter. No, they always take cash out. When the money leaves, it always leaves as cash. Always, 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 always as cash. And he's pretending, oh no, it's not stuff in the real economy. Well, it is as soon as the banks take it and they're entitled to it clearly, legally. It's their money.
Absolutely nobody. Banks can't spend them. People can't spend them. Nobody can spend them. All they're there for is...
So again, let's just understand. The banks spent them for decades. They pulled the money out of the Federal Reserve accounts all the time. They put money in, all the I've said this before, but all the tattered and crappy cash that the banks take in, all the torn stuff, they put it in the Federal Reserve account. They send it to the Federal Reserve, and the new cash in replacement for the broken cash is put in their Federal Reserve accounts. That's exactly how the Federal Reserve accounts were fed. But that it's real cash. This is just nonsense.
If one bank in the outside world owes another bank some money, they send a message to the castle to say, "Yeah, is this money?" And he says, "Are you?"
All right, so this is just the cliche, the purpose of the Federal Reserve accounts. We're not talking about their purpose for their entire existence until 2009. Clearly, 2009, the chart went completely nuts. Certainly, what's happening now is completely different than what was happening then. There's no way of saying, oh yeah, it's just business as usual. $4.4 trillion is not business as usual. Stupid people. All right, where do we want to go now? 14. We'll be done.
So that's it. Any questions?
Yeah.
So what you should have been able
you
to
on
see,
drugs?
this inflation stuff that people talked about, where's it going to come from?
All right, so where's the inflation going to come from? The inflation comes from that the only way in a crisis, so there's a crisis, let's say, and the bank creditors are saying, I want my cash. The bank is saying, my cash is in the Federal Reserve account. So I'll pull the cash out. So it says to the Federal Reserve, give me the cash. Now the Federal Reserve doesn't have any cash, and it has nowhere to get cash in a pinch. It has no creditors it can squeeze. It can't go to the drug dealers and say, give me the money you owe me. It's got no way to get any cash. All it has is debt. It doesn't have any cash. So it has to turn on the printing press. Cha-chung, 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 cha-chung. That's called inflation. That's what happened in Germany. Germany didn't go into bankruptcy, or a loaf of bread didn't end up costing $1 million in Germany because they issued a lot of bonds. No, it ended up costing $1 million because they printed a lot of cash. Venezuela, all the countries in Brazil, all the countries that went bankrupt in the past, they all went bankrupt because cha-chung, cha-chung, printing cash.
Because there's, There's no outlets. The power lies in the castle. And the castle.
It's nothing about power. It has to do with who owes the money. Whose money is it? It's the bankers' money. The checks were written with their signature. It's their money. And the only way we can erase their name and put our name appropriately on the check is we have to create money to do that. So we have to raise taxes and get $5 trillion worth. Or you have to sell the Wyoming or something. Or you have to do something to come up with the cash. Or you have to print it. And if you print it, it's inflation. Why is there only $1.9 trillion in circulation? If you can print as much cash as you need, Mystic, why has the government only printed 1.9 trillion? Why doesn't it print more if it's harmless?
Castle can't be forced to do anything because all the power lies in the castle. The people had an amount of tokens to start with. They've still got the same amount of tokens, and they'll always have.
This has nothing to do with the people. This just has to do with the rich and the paintings they're buying, the assets that are held by the rich, the number of Van Goghs on the market. And if the Van Goghs start getting too many of them on the market, then somebody has to buy some off to keep the price up. This is like gold, or this is like oil. That the markets are controlled by the volume, and this is all just about controlling volume. So when the prices started dropping, the government needed to pull equities. They need to pull ownables off the market. They had to pull some paintings off the market so the other paintings would go up in value. That's all that took place here. A bailout for the rich, period.
The same amount of tokens, according, with reference to the quantitative easing thing. In-house, it just means another load in another office. There was another load of books that said that the government was liable to give.
Right, so it's just some irrelevant fake book. That's not real money that we really owe. It's not real checks that the bank really wrote. The bank, it's on their books. They bought this stuff with their check. Their check was cashed. It's their liability. And the money that pays for it ultimately is in the Federal Reserve account. And either we pay for it, either we give cash to the bank from some other source, or they take it out of the Federal Reserve. If they take it out of the Federal Reserve, it has to be printed. If we pay back the money, okay, then we honestly get out of the deal. We pay our loan back. But it's clearly just a loan. All they did was, instead of borrowing money on the open market, in the open where everybody can see it, okay, and it's counted as real debt, they avoided it being counted as real debt by putting it in the Federal Reserve. So instead of having to say we are $28 trillion in debt, they can say we're $17 or $18 trillion in debt. That's all this is about, is hiding the frickin' liabilities and understanding that we did all of that. We created all that monstrous debt, not to serve the people, not to educate kids, not to clean up the garbage, not to, deworm the planet, not to do anything legitimate except keep the rich rich. Bail out rich people that went bankrupt. That's what we did with this debt, is we bailed out people who went bankrupt, and we wouldn't let them go bankrupt because one bankruptcy leads to another bankruptcy, and that's the cascade of bankruptcy. It's not going to be a run on the bank that sinks this economy. It's going to be a run on the bankruptcy court. Fact.
Bank tokens, which are stored in a book over there, to various banks, so they can write it on bits of paper for the people. Don't have to do it anymore. Who's the winner of quantitative easing? You could say the government, because they are.
Oh yeah, the government. It's the government owes $4.4 trillion more in debt. It somehow wins in this argument, and it's also paying the bankers interest rates on that debt. So it's a little higher. It's more like realistically $5 trillion if you probably added up all the bullshit, the shenanigans, and the yachts and the planes.
Liable to do some more paperwork. or in the real world, you can say that they've made out like bandits. That they, what was the example this morning?
Yeah. So the point is the average American's debt went from $300,000 to $600,000. That's the real world circumstance here. The percentage of what you owe to rich people went from, it goes doubled by these shenanigans, by these tricks, by freaking stinking lousy creepy fucking banksters and bummy stinking political hacks, including Obama and Bush and Clinton.
400 billion. They were liable to pay out 400 billion to out there, but they kept it all in castle, so really don't have to pay out that 400 billion anymore.
Let's just understand, that's just complete nonsense. The obligation is as real as any of the obligations the federal government has. The money was spent into the economy. There's all kinds of people that are holding the checks, so to speak, of the bank who issued it. Those obligations are real and in the economy, and somebody has to pay those people for those bad checks.
Which is good, obviously, because the government does do a lot for. He's a benevolent, that word anyway, a nice monarch, and he's good to the people and does lots of good things and spends a lot of money, and that's now for.
Oh, so let's just understand, none of this $10 trillion, the money in the FDIC insurance fund and the money in the Federal Reserve accounts, none of that money was spent on a single welfare program or any good deed done or any decent thing at all. All it was done to do was to keep the rich rich. Period. Save their bankrupt market. They saved them from their comeuncance. They got these huge capital gains profits with this stupid bubble economy, and all they did was preserve their bubble wealth with the money. That's all they did. Make the rich richer. They didn't serve any social need whatsoever with this risky bullshit adventure. These liabilities. So you tax the regular citizen and you give it to the rich. And that's all that's going on here. It's just like Trump's idiotic tax plan where the rich pay 20% and the working man pays 40%. It's just complete crap. A complete sham. You know, the wool has been pulled over the average dumbass's eyes. And this asshole helps. I'm just, can I help? Can I help fool you into thinking there's no harm, no foul? Rich get richer and the poor suckers don't know any better. Yeah, fuck you. Choke on a pancake. Or the French, a crepe of some kind. A crapé. You fuck. All right. Yeah, it is pitiful. I mean, he pointed out in the beginning of the video that nobody gets anything right on this subject because one commenter actually kind of figured out these are reserve accounts, and at least he got that part right. But it is amazing. Nobody, no economist, none of them explain this correctly. Nobody explains what took place here, except me. Shit. And it's so obvious. I mean, I'm just saying, look at the reserve account. You can see the chart. Let me show you the chart again. I mean, fuck, it's just so fucking obvious. I don't even know what, you shouldn't even have to make an argument. How does the money get into the Federal Reserve account, right? How did it get in back in 2004, 1958? So like I said, this chart number, this line goes straight down. Doesn't go up at all. Nothing. Forever. For, all the way back to like 1900. Nothing. And all of a sudden, 2009, $4.4 trillion. I mean, 4.4 trillion, not 4.24 billion, $4.4 trillion. And so the only money ever went into this account was cash. Cash is the only way it gets out. Cash is the only way it gets in. That's it. Forever. And all of a sudden now we're supposed to pretend this isn't really cash. No, this is $4.4 trillion in this is cash waiting to leave. And the only reason why it doesn't leave, just think about it. If the banks had $4.4 trillion, just think about it. They have a chance to make 0.25 interest over here, or they can make 10% interest over here. Now, you're going to say there's not some reason why the banksters, the little smart banksters, can't figure out to take their $4 trillion and put it in this bank instead of leaving it in this bank? Oh, obviously they know it's not their money quite yet. Okay, they made a deal with the government. It's borrowed money. It's not real money, okay? I mean, it's obvious. The banks would not leave $4.4 trillion in this stupid bank account. They would fucking buy Google stock. Fuck. Obviously, this money has to stay here till the federal government fixes it, pays it back. Shit, it's a loan. It's debt. Plain and simple. I'm sorry if I'm too close to the mic. I forgot about that.